everyone. Welcome to the webinar on how to build creative synergy in teams. This is a topic I'm super excited about, and I'm so excited you're here. So thanks for joining us. I'm just going to add a little bit to what Dan said and point out that I have a business called Climber Consulting, and I have been working with teams probably for, 20 years, but have had this business for about 7 years. And what I do is I do creativity trainings. I help teams become more effective together and more creative. And the last 5 years, almost 5 years, I was in a PhD program where I was specifically studying creativity in teams and leadership. And so today, what I'm going to share with you is I'm going to teach you how creativity in teams works. I think it's an area that we talk a lot about. We tell teams like, oh, be more creative, but we don't actually teach them how it works. And so particularly, you're going to learn about the creative synergy scale and how it can help your team be more innovative. And this is a scale that I developed and implemented over this last year doing some research through my PhD. So I'm really excited about it. And yeah, we're going to dive into that. Let me just go over a few logistics. This webinar is for you. And I say that because use the chat box like Dan mentioned. If you see up in the top of my slide, here, I'm going to try this little annotate. Can you see that little chat icon? That's what the icon looks like. It's somewhere on your screen. So if you can open up that chat box, because we are going to have some question breaks. So basically, I'll present for a little bit. We'll have a question break. And then if you have questions or comments or anything to add, you can add your comments in that chat box. And actually, we're going to use it right now for some introductions. So I want to know who's here, who's there. That's better. All right, so in the chat box, answer these 3 questions, but do it all in one reply. So name, where are you calling in from, and then what type of work do you do? Particularly, what type of teams do you work with? Or if you're a facilitator, you could put that, or if you're here to learn more about working with a team that you're a member of, you can put that. And I will go ahead and share my reply so you can kind of see what I mean by putting it all in one response. So go ahead and who's here? Fill out the chat box. All right, I'm going to read out some of these. I don't know that everybody is able to see the chat box. So we have Mark from Colorado Springs. He's a facilitator, program director for a summer camp, adventure programming. We have Shelly. Wendy Kripp from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Woohoo! International, love it. Welcome, Canada. And she works for a credit union in the planning department. There's Sarah from Madison, Wisconsin. Yes, I just moved from Madison to Asheville. So Sarah, great to see you online. Sarah works at a small liberal arts college there and has been involved with restructuring. That's cool. Daniel Cape from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, working on a PhD and focusing on creativity studies. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And he's here to learn more about creativity and experiential education. That's great, Dan. Welcome. Sharon from Massachusetts. She's developing skill-based international experiential programs for college-age students. Samantha King from Mooresville, North Carolina, not very far from me. Okay, I don't know if I'm gonna read all of these. Claudia Belanger, also from Canada, from Quebec. Claudia, I might have gotten your last name wrong, I'm sorry. And Claudia works with outdoor leadership programs. So we have kind of a range here. We have some outdoor leadership programs, some adventure therapy, people who are in private practice, working for summer camps, different organizations. So welcome, everyone. I love seeing that people are coming here from all over North America. That's awesome. All right, good to see. Oh, there's one more that I missed. Lori, welcome, Lori. Another person from Quebec. Wow, Canada, you're represented today. That's awesome. And Joe from Portland, Oregon. Welcome, Joe, from Lewis and Clark College. All right, people from all over. I'm sure there'll be more people commenting as they come in. Glad to see you figured out how to use the chat box. Okay, let's dive into some of this content. I want to start out and give you some definitions. And this might seem like, oh, it's a little bit elementary. Why do we need to look at definitions? But I think sometimes we make assumptions. And so this is a way to avoid making assumptions. So the first definition is creativity. And I think of creativity simply as novelty that is valuable. And by novelty, I mean original, different, unique. What I don't mean are like little plastic novelty objects. Sometimes people think of that when they hear the word novelty because of novelty stores. But in this case, we're thinking in this broader sense of the word, very unique, different, original. And then valuable. Sometimes that's a word that people kind of stumble with in this context, but basically it's something that's having a positive influence, a positive effect. It might be monetary value, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So creativity might be something that has no, something that you do that has no monetary value, but it actually has a really positive impact. And so that's what I mean when I say creativity. What I don't mean is artisticness. That is a part of creativity, or you might need some creativity to be artistic, but you don't need to be artistic to be creative. So if you're doubting your creativity, the good news is it's okay. If you don't know how to draw, that's irrelevant. Today it's talking more about generating ideas and solving problems in a unique, valuable way. So that's what I mean by creativity. Creative synergy. This is a definition that I created this last year, and creative synergy is the interactions amongst team members where the collective creative results are greater than the sum of their individual efforts. So basically 1 + 1 is greater than 2. Kind of your classic collaboration, really. When a group of people come together, we want them to perform at a higher level than they could each individually. And in this case, we're talking about creativity, to perform creatively at a higher level. So that's creative synergy. So when I say helping your team achieve creative synergy, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, and speaking of teams, I want to actually define that definition as well. And on one hand, knowing that most of you already work with teams, you might be thinking, yeah, we got this. You don't need to explain it to us. But I want to point out a nuance that I think is important. So this is a definition of teams from Katzenbach and Smith, who wrote a great book called The Wisdom of Teams. And teams are a team is a small number of people committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. Okay, that's teams. I'm going to set that aside for a minute and explain what a working group is. And when I saw these definitions, it was actually kind of a big aha for me. So working groups, members interact primarily to share information, best practices, or perspectives, and to make decisions to help each individual member perform within his or her area of responsibility. Also from Katzenbach and Smith. So for me, this was a big aha because I have been in situations where I was on what now I see was really a working group, but it was being referred to as a team. But we had no collective responsibility. We had no reason to really collaborate. We were cooperating. We were very cooperative. We worked together in a sense, but we weren't creating something together. And I think that's the big difference between a working group and a team. An example of a working group is I am a member of a mastermind group, which is a group of consultants. There's 4 of us, very small group. We meet on a monthly basis. And our purpose is to help each other succeed in our respective businesses. So it's the place I think of that I can go ask the stupid questions. And I can get feedback on ideas I'm thinking about. I can get some input, different perspectives. But at the end of the day, my success is based on my performance. No one else in that working group has any influence over me. And the same in the other way, I might influence them, but I'm not, their success is their success in a sense. Whereas the team, it's that collective success or failure, right? This definition of teams I think of as pretty aspirational, and that You might be on a team that's not necessarily a working group where you actually have a shared purpose that you're trying to get to. But you're not necessarily meeting all the criteria in this definition. And that's okay. I think this is a definition to strive for. Really high-performing teams would meet this definition. So I point this out because the research I'm going to share with you is based on teams, not working groups. And when there can be clarification about which you are and which you're trying to be, I think it can just make a lot of sense. Okay, so I've just thrown a bunch of definitions at you. I'm probably talking pretty fast, I typically do, but I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. So do you have any questions about any of those definitions or any comments? Anything in there that was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So throw them up on the chat box and we'll go from there. Okay, so Sharon had a question. She says, how can you shift a group from being a working group to a team? Good question. And I think we'll answer some of that in the rest of the webinar. I think, I'm going to go back to the definition real quick so you can see it. I think the biggest thing is to talk about, to have that conversation about which are we? Are we a working group or a team, and which do we want to be? So actually, I worked with a team, I think it was last week, it was the corporate leadership team of a national pizza franchise. And the leadership team they have an executive team and there's the leadership team. And so the leadership team is fairly new, maybe a year or so old. It's kind of an idea that they're exploring, like, oh, do we want more people involved in some of the decision making? And the company is growing, so it might make sense. And I put this up, and I mean, collectively, the room was like, oh, we're a working group. Wow, we are not a team. We might want to be a team, but we are not there yet. And that in and of itself, I think, can be really helpful, is just to have that conversation and present this. And then to work towards developing a common purpose, developing shared performance goals, looking at your approach, which we'll talk about a little bit in a bit, and also looking at how do you keep each other mutually accountable, and having those conversations can be really helpful. So Sharon, that's just a pretty quick answer. We'll get into a little bit more of that as we go, but I hope that's helpful. Okay, so another question from Suzanne in New York. Traditionally, work teams were manufacturing ones, TQM. Few manufacturing operations left. So how to use best practices to teams in main only? I think that meant name only, like leadership or project teams. Suzanne, I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, but I will say that this research I'm sharing was primarily done on non-manufacturing teams. So I would say, you say traditionally teams are manufacturing ones. I would say, yeah, traditionally from like maybe 1970 and, behind, or, prior to that. I think more recently, at least in the United States and North America, manufacturing teams are fewer and fewer. You might have more experience with manufacturing teams than I do. So, but to me, I think what we're talking about, the concepts are all the same, regardless of the type of team that, whether it's a manufacturing team, a product development team, the doctors at a healthcare company, college staff who are trying to work together to help students succeed, like whatever the context, I think that what we're talking about here will apply to any context. Okay, that's all the questions I see at the moment, so I'm going to keep going, and feel free to jump in at the next question break. Okay, so let's talk about what affects team creative synergy. And yeah, so we're going to just talk about what affects team creative synergy. I was going to make another comment, but so one of the things that I struggled with when I was preparing for this research study is, first of all, I read like hundreds of articles and other research, and those of you who've done this kind of research, you get it. Like that's sort of, you have to see what's already out there. What I was finding was there were there were all these different variables that impacted team performance, but to me, they were very scattered and they were all over the place. And sometimes people were putting two variables together that to me didn't quite connect, and I didn't get it. So what I actually did is I created this model to just help categorize the variables that affect team performance. So the first thing is, let's imagine you have a team. There are input variables. So input variables are things that they're in place before the team gets together. And then, so everybody shows up, and these are all the inputs that the team members have, or there might be things outside of the team that are affecting the team. But then there's the process that the team uses as they're working together. So input, process, and then on the far end is output. So output would be their performance or their creative synergy, creative outcome. So input, process, output. And then there's internal and external. Internal meaning within the team or outside of the team. So an example of an internal input would be things like education levels, prior experience, personalities of team members, cultural backgrounds that team members come with. So they have all of this in place before they get together, but it's also internal to the team. Another category of factors are external inputs. So this might be like the reward structure within an organization. So for instance, a common situation would be that people are put on a team and they're pushed to work together, but then they're rewarded individually. That's definitely going to affect team performance versus being rewarded as a team. And again, that's in place before the team gets together, most likely. It's outside of the team. That's an example of it in external input. Organizational climate, physical environment, these things can all impact team performance. And then there's external process. So now the team, you can imagine this vertical line in the middle is like when the team starts working together. So now the team's hanging out, we're interacting. There are things outside of the team that are still going to impact the team. Leadership styles from people maybe who supervise the team but aren't on the team. What's their organizational support for creativity or for whatever performance measure they're looking at? Any external accountability that team has, that's part of their process. But finally, there's internal process. These are things like team dynamics, shared purpose, the collaborative process that the team uses together. So I'm reading all this research and I organize it in these 4 categories. And what I found out is that the number one factors that impact team performance and creativity are internal process variables. Now, what's so cool about that is that if I'm on a team, that means that as a team member, my behavior, my skills, the way I interact with my teammates makes a big difference. It makes a bigger difference than the leadership style of somebody who's supervising us. And I think it's so easy for team members to look outside and be like, oh, well, we're not creative because this person is doing this and they're not even on the team. Or, you know, our organization doesn't reward this, or our space is too cramped. Yeah, those things can matter, but not near as much as what your process is like and how you interact with each other. So that was exciting to me to kind of figure that out and narrow that down. And so I kind of narrowed in on internal process. So for the rest of the webinar today, we're only talking about internal process variables. So what I figured out is that there are 3 elements that impact creative synergy. They're all internal process variables. Team purpose. So generally when a team gets together, sure, there's some external purpose or somebody put this team together because they had a specific, intent or plan. But then that shared team purpose has to emerge and the team members have to, latch onto that. There's team dynamics, which most of you, if you're a member of AEE, you're very familiar with team dynamics. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then there's team creative process. And this is generally the area people are least familiar with. So team purpose specifically looking at shared goals and team commitment. So how committed am I? How invested am I into those goals? Do I feel like a collective ownership with the team purpose? And I have worked with teams. I was working with an executive team about a year or two ago. And at one point I asked them, I said, what is the purpose of this team? And they kind of fumbled and looked around at each other and they said, well, like, do you mean our mission statement? And no, the mission statement is about the entire organization. But I mean this in this particular team, what's the purpose of that team? And I share that story because I've been kind of amazed that not all teams can answer that. And it is hands down the biggest factor that impacts team success. So team purpose is important. Team dynamics, specifically trust, communication, and creative abrasion. And trust and communication are, for the most part, fairly obvious, but creative abrasion, by that what I mean is we can disagree around ideas and concepts, but we don't necessarily disagree because of our personalities. And I know that I can disagree with you, and then you're not going to be mad at me later. So there's not, there's more disagreement kind of at an intellectual level, but not necessarily on a personal level or an identity level. And then there's team creative process. So some examples of creative process are things like creative problem solving, design thinking, synectics, TRIZ. If you've never heard of any of these, that's okay. It's not even important that a team knows the name of the process they're using, but essentially they should spend time finding problems, like what are they trying to solve, what problems they're trying to solve, finding solutions to those problems, and then implementing those solutions. And hopefully that is particularly, well, all three stages, hopefully they're applying some creativity, they're looking at new ideas, they're not just like, oh, let's do it this way because we did it this way before. And having some process to come up with new ideas, to clarify their challenges, that's what I mean by team creative process. Okay, again, I just threw a lot at you. What questions do you have about team performance and team creativity? Granted, we were at a pretty high level there, and we're going to get more detailed, but any questions right now that are really jumping out at you, feel free to write them in the chat box. Oh, okay. So got a question that says, is there anything teams can do at the onset of a project to prime for creative synergy? Yes, there is a lot that they can do. At the end of I guess I should maybe give you the layout of all this. I didn't do that at the beginning, but in a moment, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to assess creative synergy in a team. And then we'll look at how do you specifically help with, improve team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process. But I will just say, I think that there's a lot you could do right at the beginning, and I think the beginning is critical. Although, if your team's been around for a while, don't feel like you can't do anything because it's too late, because that's not true. But I think the first is just clarifying that team purpose. I think that's one of the first things that a team should do. That's about team purpose. As far as team dynamics, helping team members get to know each other makes a big difference and helps them be more comfortable together. And then team creative process, a bit longer of an answer, but there are a number of different tools and techniques that you can use to help jumpstart that creativity. Post-it notes, I'm a huge fan of, and I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. So I hope that helps, Dan. I know it's pretty, or was that Dan that asked that question? I hope that was helpful. Pretty high level. So after I developed this model, I was really curious of, okay, great. So these three things impact creative synergy, but how do I know if my team has creative synergy? How do I assess that in a team? So I'm going to explain what I did. I basically developed a research project. So I'm going to explain the research design. I'll try not to I'm not going to get too technical. If you really want to get into it, you can read my dissertation. I'll send you the link for that. It's free. It's published for the public. But okay, so I developed this two-part study, mostly quantitative, a little bit qualitative. And what I did is I developed a scale. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about developing a scale before I started this. Fortunately, I had an amazing advisor, Dr. Carol Barron and Dr. Mitch Kuzi, and the two of them, like, they were awesome. And anytime you're developing a scale, you start out with a survey. So I had 120 items that were looking at those three pieces of team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process. Start out with all these survey questions, and I sent this out to thousands of people. Well, I would say maybe 2,000 people, 1,500. And I got 1,220 people responded to my survey. 830 of them took the complete survey. So that was the number for my study. This was incredible, y'all. Some of you may have taken the survey. It was sent out for me in December 2015. Anyway, if you did, I'd love to hear, if you took it, just because that's kind of fun to know. But 830 people, the cool thing was I only needed 300. So this high number meant that the results were a lot more powerful when it came to running the statistical analysis. So I have 830 people. They've all responded to these questions about a team that they're a part of. And in order to create it into a scale, I do something called factor analysis. And I used exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis. I'm not even going to go into what that means. If you want to chat about it later, I love that stuff now. I used to hate it, but most of you probably don't care. What you should know is the thing that factor analysis does is it looks at, okay, I had these ideas that these three components impacted creative synergy, but factor analysis looks at, do those actually impact creative synergy? And the cool thing was, yeah, they do. Otherwise, I wouldn't have shared that model with you. So that was really exciting to see that the three factors that I thought, they do indeed impact creative synergy. And there's some robust statistics to show that. For those of you that understand statistics, here are the reliability results from the Cronbach Alpha. The reliability is like, okay, how reliable is the scale? Does it actually test what we think it's going to test? And what you should know about these numbers are that in June, I presented this research to the Creative Problem Solving Institute in Buffalo, New York, which is a really awesome conference. And there are a number of creativity researchers, people who do this kind of stuff, right? And when I presented this slide, there was, in the room, it was like, and there was this collective gasp. And I didn't know what that meant at first. I'm like, oh my gosh, does that mean they're impressed or not? And I found out they were impressed, that they were like, wow, these numbers are really good. So anyway, that was kind of a cool response to see that, whoa, this scale I created is really robust. So I get this whole scale, right? And I've narrowed it down. Part of the process is you get rid of the questions you ask that aren't very good. So I have 29 items left. And now I want to find out, okay, great. The statistics are good, but what do real people think? So I gave the scale to 3 different teams from 3 different industries and got their feedback. And here's, here are the 3 teams. Team A was, these are all fake names, but University of the Midwest, a student affairs team of 8 people. Team B was a financial services association, specifically a business development team. And so they're a large nonprofit that provides resources to credit unions. And then finally, a creative services agency. And this was all the staff in their company, 14 people. And they do things like web design, graphic design, marketing, that kind of thing for their clients. So these 3 teams took the scale, and then I met with them and I gave them the results. Team A and B were local to where I lived, so I met with them in person. And Team C was several hundred miles away, so we met in a webinar format, which was very interesting to facilitate a team via webinar. I learned a lot. Anyway, here is an example of some of the questions that the team, that's in the scale that the team members took. I'm going to read these because I'm not 100% sure everybody can see slides in case there's a technical glitch. But a team purpose item was our team is dedicated to reaching our goals. And all the responses were between strongly disagree and strongly agree. So a 6-point Likert scale, people responded. Team members respect each other's different working styles. That's an example of a team dynamics question. And our team uses a variety of techniques to generate ideas. That's a team creative process question. So you probably can guess, looking at these 3 scale items, that this would be pretty much impossible to answer if you're a brand new team. And that was part of the intent. This is specifically for an established team. Now, they don't have to have been together for 10 years, but they need to be established enough that they can, there's some behavior they can observe, right? In fact, I recently shared that, I recently did this with the restaurant franchise that I was talking about a minute ago. And there was one person on the team who he opened up the scale, he tried to take it, and he emailed me and he said, I've only been here for a month and I haven't been to a single team meeting yet. He said, should I take this? I'm like, no, don't worry, because he wouldn't be able to answer the questions. So his input was missing from that, which made sense. And I looked at, like, well, maybe should I have a minimum amount of time that the team should have been together? But most of you know that you could have a team that's, like, let's say, for instance, an outward bound team on a 14-day expedition. By day 10, they could answer these questions. Whether they're high performing or not, they're going to know, if there's respect, do they feel dedicated to the goals? But then you could also have a team that's together for 10 months and not be able to answer this yet because for whatever reason they're slower in developing. And some of that might be by design. Maybe they're only meeting once a month or every couple months or whatever. So there's no right or wrong as far as the length of time. They just have to be somewhat established. Okay, so here's an example of what part of the results will look like when you get the Creative Synergy Scale scores. So these were the 3 teams that were in the study. And I'm just going to talk a little about a couple interesting things that came up. So the first is that you'll notice there's this trajectory that all 3 teams scored highest in team purpose, middle in team dynamics, and lowest in team creative process. And at first I was like, oh, that's got to be a coincidence. I don't know. But then I started thinking about it, and it actually kind of made sense. And since then, I've given this scale to many more teams, and this is a pretty common trajectory. And to me, it makes sense because team purpose it's the most obvious, it's the most concrete. I think it's the one that in some ways is the easiest. I'm not saying it's always easy, but it might be the easiest of the 3. And so it seems to make sense to me that teams would have a pretty decent understanding of their team purpose. In the middle are team dynamics. And I think that collectively, our society, we have a collective consciousness around team dynamics. So when I mention trust, communication, conflict, people are like, yeah, I know that those are important in a team. Nowadays, we're taught this from as young as, elementary school, maybe even before that. But certainly in middle school and high school, there's conversation around the value of working together in a team. So there's, I think, a collective value around this and a collective understanding. Not that it's excellent necessarily, but it's more comfortable, or more familiar, I should say. Maybe not comfortable, but more familiar. And then finally, there's team creative process. And I think this got the lowest score overall because we don't talk about creativity other than saying, like, oh, be creative. But we don't teach creativity in school. There's very little sort of collective understanding about creativity. Now, fortunately, that's changing. I would say in the last 10 years, there's now a collective value around creativity. And then we realize, like, oh, yeah, maybe we do want people to be creative and innovative together. But it's not being taught in schools necessarily. I mean, maybe occasionally here and there, but not collectively the way team dynamics are. And even still, we could teach a lot more around that. Okay, so that's one interesting thing. Chances are, if you were to take this, your team would have a similar score. Okay, so the next thing I want to point out is the differences between the teams. Now, this has got to be coincidence, but every team scored highest in a different area. So team purpose, the highest score was Team B, which was the financial services agency, the business development team. And when I met with them, it was so obvious that they had a strong sense of purpose. Just the way they talked, the projects they talked about, they were very motivated and focused. And so it made a lot of sense that they scored highest on team purpose. And it's not that they were comparing with each other, but a 5.8 is a very high score out of 6, 1 through 6. I don't know if there would ever be a perfect score of 6 in any of these, results. And then team dynamics, the team that scored the highest was the student affairs team at the university. And those of you that are familiar with student affairs are probably not surprised, because there is value placed in that profession on collaboration and working together and communicating and trust. And so that wasn't very surprising to me. Kind of cool, I guess. And then team creative process, the team that scored highest was the creative services agency, web design, graphic design. And I was like, well, I kind of hope they scored highest. However, to me, what really is valuable is what happens in the conversation when the team gets these results. And the creative services agency, even looking at their creativity scores, they were like, oh, wow, we've got some work to do. For instance, the question, our team uses a variety of techniques to generate ideas. We're like, no, only thing we do is brainstorming. Brainstorming is a technique. It may or may not be the best technique depending on the situation. So that conversation led them to think differently about how they're approaching creativity. And when I talk about creative process, it also means just not just how they approach creativity, but how they approach the process of their work. So for instance, what do the team meetings look like? Is there collaboration? Are different people talking, or is it always just one person? That might not necessarily be about creativity, but it impacts team dynamics, and it impacts team performance, or team purpose and team performance. Okay, so then I looked at this question of like, okay, does this scale seem accurate to I was asking this to those 3 teams in the study, and I was very pleased to hear that they were like, yeah, this feels pretty accurate. This is awesome. It would be a little bit alarming if they got the results and like, whoa, is this our team? This doesn't seem like us. So to know that the teams felt this was accurate was valuable. Now, if you're curious, you'll notice that Team C scored lowest on all these questions of whether the scale was accurate. And Team C, I think that they were most surprised by their results. Actually, I'm going to go on the next slide because I talk about some of the responses that they had to accuracy. So Team A, somebody from Team A said, overall, just looking at it for what it is, it feels pretty accurate, at least from my standpoint anyway. Someone from Team B says, I don't think any of the responses surprised me. So to me, that kind of signals that we're all on the same page. Even with the responses that have a wide spread, none of them really surprised me, I guess. So what that person was saying is that when you get the results for the creative synergy scale, you see all 29 items and you'll see the responses. So from 1 to 6, you can see how many people responded with strongly agree, disagree, so forth. And what happens in many teams is that there'll be a wide range. So there might be an item where somebody says strongly agree, and their response is all the way through till strongly disagree. And that in and of itself is really helpful information, because that's saying that all the people on the team are not having the same experience. So one person might say, oh yeah, we totally respect each other's working styles, strongly agree. And then somebody else has strongly disagreed. No, I don't feel like we respect each other's working styles. Oh, like that's really helpful. And that can generate some valuable conversation. Finally, team C said, no, I don't think it aligns with what I thought, but if people were honest, then I guess it is. And in this particular team, there were two owners of the company, and one of them was quite surprised by the results. And I would say some of the results were kind of mediocre to not great. Basically, like she was finding out that some of the team members didn't feel respected as part of the team. And so basically what she was saying, she's like, this isn't what I expected, but I guess it's accurate. And that to me is really valuable and helpful for a team to get this kind of feedback. Okay, I am in a few minutes. We're gonna have a question break right now, but then I'm gonna talk about how do you use this to actually influence team creativity. But before I get into that, what questions do you have about the scale or the research or how it was designed? Any of those things? What questions do you have? All right, so the next question is, okay, great. We have these results, but so what? How do you actually use this to enhance team performance and team creativity? So I mentioned before that I had these in-person debriefs with a couple of the teams that were in the study. And one of the things that came up was it was just the conversation was so valuable in itself. One person said, I think that the results will serve as a platform to discuss possible/potential areas for improvement. It gives us a reason to have the difficult, painful conversations. The nice thing about something like a scale like this is now there's like a third point. So now I can bring up something about respectful interactions by looking at the scale. And it doesn't have to be about me personally so much. I mean, it's not about me and the fact that I'm a part of this team, but it's easier to talk about it in that way. And it's a really great starting point because this is data. It's data from everybody in the team. Everybody's had a say in those results. And those valuable conversations can improve team dynamics, can help clarify purpose. They can help change process if needed. So really helpful. And then I think in explaining the scale and how and talking about the three areas of purpose, dynamics, and process, team members get a greater understanding of what affects team creativity and team performance. And you all have probably seen this before, of sometimes just understanding something can help lead to change, especially if it's something you knew nothing about before. So those are two things that, two ways you can use the scale. But the other thing is, and this happened to me maybe a month ago, I was working with a marketing team of a technology firm. This is a firm that produces software. And there's 9 people on the marketing team. They took the creative synergy scale, and we were having like a day-long training around creativity. So I had the results ahead of time. So I was able to design this program to specifically look at, to address some of their weaknesses, some of their gaps, I should say. And so we actually didn't spend a lot of time on team purpose because they were really clear on it. They knew exactly what their team purpose was, but they were a little bit weaker on team dynamics and team creative process. And when I looked at the details of their answer, that helped me design the day to help them learn and fill in those gaps. But what was so cool is in the morning, I shared the results with them, and I could feel this energy building in the team and this excitement of like, okay, great, we have these results. Like, what do we do? Let's go. Let's get started. And it just created this motivation to work towards being more creative together and to help them, look at the value of spending some time, practicing communication or building trust, or help them understand how to have conflict together or the value of conflict. So that was really cool, seeing how the scale motivated them. That was something that I hadn't really thought about, to be honest, at least not quite in the way that it played out there. So The scale gives a snapshot of like, here's this moment in time. And then later, you could potentially take it in 6 months or a year later and see if you have any change. Okay, so now what? Let's say you want to focus on team purpose. That's an area where you didn't do so great. Actually, a team that I worked with not too long ago, they had lower than a 5, which I think it was actually the lowest score I've seen so far. And yeah, they need some help with this area. So let's say that you need to develop your team purpose. Honestly, we could do like a day-long training just on how to build team purpose. So I'm going to just give a couple little highlights. The first is have a conversation, spend some time collectively developing some sort of mantra or manifesto or whatever you want to call it. Personally, I'm not a big fan of mission statements. I think that they have a tendency to become very tedious and whitewashed, and there are conversations about should we use the word of or to or some other 2-letter word. They can be very tedious. But whatever you do need to write it down. Now, if you want to really craft it and do some wordsmithing, pick 2 people that love that in the team, send them off to do some wordsmithing and come back. But don't bore the entire team of 10 people on wordsmithing the mission statement. Maybe that's just my personality, but something to think about. But whatever you do, you want to spend some time collectively talking about like, what's our purpose? What do we do? And then you want to talk about it a lot, especially if you are the team leader. So, and give an example of a client of mine and how they talk about their purpose. And this is more the organizational purpose, but they have 4 values that are part of that purpose and part of their focus. And at every meeting, like say the executive team's getting together, they start off and I can't remember what they call it, to be honest, but somebody just shouts out like, okay, integrity. And then somebody provides an example from, that day or the previous week where they saw integrity in action. It might've been in the company, it might've been in their personal life. But the value of doing that is, one, they're just taking a moment to reinforce like, hey, these are our values and they're really important to us. And the other thing is, I assure you, every person at the corporate level of that company I could walk in and be like, hey, what are the top 4 values of this company? And they'd be like, boom, 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 boom. And they could give me examples. And it helps them make decisions because they can look at this and say, if we do this, is this acting with integrity? Because if it's not, let's not do this, because that's not who we are. And we want to continually be aligned with who we are. But I think and that's maybe a little bit of a side example because it's about values, which to me, values and purpose are connected, but they're not the same. But even just decisions that you're making, talking about, okay, does this line up with our purpose? Is this who we are? Is this are these part of our shared goals? Or is this a side project that is going to divert us? So that's what I mean by talking about it a lot. Team dynamics. Trust, communication, creative abrasion. AEE folks, you all know what this is. This is a trust leap, very similar to a trust fall, kind of the next level up. And I put this up here because I think sometimes it's this classic reflex response of like, oh, we need to develop trust. Let's do trust falls together. And y'all, I have over 1,000 hours facilitating ropes courses. To me, trust falls and trust leaps do not develop the kind of trust that is important in this context. They can help, but you don't need to go do that. And here's what I mean. Next week is the AEE conference. Those of you, if you've never been and you're going for the first time, it's a blast. It's just a great, great group of people. And if I were to walk in any workshop at AEE, and in the first 5 minutes, they're like, all right, we're doing trust falls. Who feels comfortable doing it? I'd raise my hand and be like, I don't know anybody in this room, but I totally feel comfortable that every single person there is going to, play their role and they're going to catch me. Trust them absolutely 100%. I trust them physically in that way. Now, same workshop, we're in a small group of people and we're developing ideas for something. I might not necessarily be as vocal because I don't know those people. I don't know who they are. I don't know their personalities. I don't know what their reaction's going to be. That's a different type of trust. Excuse me. That's more of that affective trust. To me, they're different. And so I say that to say, what if you're going to develop some activities to help build team dynamics, make sure they fit and that they're actually aligned with what you're trying to achieve. I think that sometimes that can be a problem in experiential education, outdoor education, is that we don't align the activities as much as we should to the goals. So there's a lot more I could say about team dynamics and developing that, but I'll leave it at that for now. Okay, team creative process. Creative process to me, and just process in general, is huge because it impacts team dynamics and it impacts purpose as well. If you're using creative problem solving, the 4 elements of that are clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. And a lot of the items on the creative synergy scale ask questions about those 4 categories. The first thing is be intentional about meeting design. So the marketing team that I mentioned earlier that I was working with last month, they were having one of their challenges is that not everybody felt heard in the meetings. And so we talked about how they could actually design the meeting differently to allow everyone's voice to be heard. It could be as simple as, hey, let's just do a quick go around and share a sentence about what you're thinking about this project. 10 people, that's going to take you maybe 2 minutes if people really stick to the one sentence. Really quick, a way to get everybody's voice in the room. Then you can dig in a little bit more. Like, hey, Shelly, the comment you made, can you share a little bit more about that? I want to hear what you have to say. And now Shelly can share a little bit more and go into more depth. Whereas perhaps before that, she may not have spoken up. So that's just one example of how meeting design can impact team dynamics, creativity, so forth. The other is the creative problem-solving process, design thinking, any of these processes that you might use, they're learnable. You can learn how to use them, and when you take those, whether whole or parts of them, they will help you be more creative. So learning some of the tools and techniques that can help you clarify problems, generate ideas, develop those ideas further, and then implementing solutions. One of my favorite tools is Post-it notes, which fortunately are easy to get, inexpensive relatively, and they're just so easy. And it could be as simple as, instead of doing a verbal brainstorm, everybody gets a stack of Post-it notes, write your ideas, 1 idea per note, let's put them up on the wall. Wow, really different way to get everybody's voice in the room, and also a new way to get different ideas and new ideas. And there's some challenges that classic brainstorming doesn't always allow as diverse or creative ideas as you might find in other processes or other techniques. Anyway, that's a whole nother webinar right there. But okay, I just went really fast through a few ways that you can implement team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process. So what questions do you have right now? What's going on in your head? Or comments. If you have comments as well, feel free to add those to the chat box. Oh, somebody says, how can we use the scale in our own practice? Yes, that's an awesome question. I'm going to answer that in just a minute. So hang on to that. Another question here from Sharon. Any recommendations for best of breed for ways to teach more about creative process? Maybe that's a typo. I don't know what that best of breed is. But anyway, how to teach creative process. Yes, I have a few recommendations. That's one of the things that I do with companies is I go in and I teach creative problem solving and that process. You could hire me if you wanted, but there are other options as well. One resource that I'll share with you on a future slide in a few minutes is I have a podcast called The Deliberate Creative, and it's on both iTunes and Google Play, so Android or iPhone. There are over 50 episodes. They're all free, and there's all these pieces in there about creative process. In fact, the first 8 episodes kind of go together, and it's a great starting point to understand creative process. There are some other things, like there's the Creative Problem Solving Institute, great resource if you wanted to go and to a multi-day training and then come back to your team. Let me just make sure I'm answering the question. Of course, there's also a number of books if you want to learn more about creative process. Anyway, I hope that's a few things, Sharon. Feel free to email me and connect with me later if you need more on that. Okay, Catherine says, thanks, this is great. It seems that sometimes individuals and teams bring different values or experiences connected with how we define or work with creativity, trust, integrity. I'm thinking of meetings with teams where we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, and there's a struggle that may stem back to how we define some of these core values. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think one of the things that comes up a lot when we're talking about creativity or like you're mentioning just core values is it takes time. And I think taking the time to have those conversations, like what are our shared values and how do we want to operate as a team? And then having those in a visual format, like paper, whatever, so that you can remember them and not have a lot, don't have 15 values, but have 4, like the restaurant franchise I mentioned, and refer to them frequently. Talk about, okay, how does this decision fit with that value, especially if there's some doubt. So that's, and then thinking about meeting design. If you have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, are you using that meeting design in the best way? So for instance, if the meeting is the type of meeting where you're disseminating and delivering information, it's going to have a very different feel than if it's a meeting where you're dialoguing and having conversation about issues or projects that have come up. And maybe there's some situations where you don't have to go around and do a report out, and people can share that via email, or if you're using a tool like Slack or Asana, but maybe there's another format where they could share that reporting out. Sometimes we spend a lot of time doing that where we don't really need to. So I think ultimately figuring out, can you redesign the meetings, and can you do it in a way where that you're using the time for the most, to get the most out of it, and then having that conversation about shared values. So I hope that helps, Catherine. Okay, Sheila says you're looking on more information on proper trust building exercises. And I think that's a little beyond what we can cover right now. But if you want to have, email me, we can chat a little bit more about that. Okay, I'm aware of the time. We're a couple minutes over, and I'm almost done. I want to share with you the answer to the question of how can we use the scale in our own practice. All right, so if you want your team to be more creative and more amazing, you can use this creative synergy scale to help you increase creativity and innovation in your team. And like I mentioned before, it's a great way to kind of get that baseline, and then also to motivate team members to learn new skills. So all you got to do is go to that link down there, climbmerconsulting.com/AEE, and Dan's going to put that in the chat box. You can just click on it. And normally the scale is $25 per person, but today I'm giving everyone on this AE webinar a 25% discount. This is only through Friday, October 20th. So today's Wednesday, so it'll automatically cut off the discount Friday night. There's the discount code. So basically go to that website, click on the buy now, and enter that code. But let me explain how it's going to work once you get it, because just some helpful details. So when you buy the scale for a team, you have to buy 1 scale per person. So if you have 10 people on your team, you need 10 scales. You're welcome to buy from more than one team, but you have to make that purchase separate. So purchase for this team, 10 people over here, put in your credit card, go do another purchase for 5 or however many you need. What's going to happen is you're going to get an email, and it's going to take a couple of days because I do this manually, is you're going to get an email with a customized link for your team, which is why you have to make those purchases separately. Because if you make one purchase, you're only going to get one link. And if you have 2 teams, that's going to be a disaster. You're then going to share that link with the team, and I'll put in there kind of some verbiage that you can use or you can edit if you'd like. And then once everyone has completed the scale, you're going to email me and I'm going to process the results for you. And that's a little bit manual on my end, but you'll get a report. I'll email you a report with the results that you can then share with your team. And I'll include in that a facilitator guide. Now, what you get in the report is this full color report, all the results laid out. The scale also has an open-ended question, and so you'll see the results of all those open-ended questions as well. And then you can print that out, print copies for everybody, and then you can set up a team meeting to debrief the scale. That's where the real richness is going to come from that meeting. And like I said, I'll include just a really short one-page facilitator guide that can help you. Or if you want help with designing that meeting or even facilitating it, let me know. I'd be happy to help you all with that. But once again, there is the link, especially those of you who are rock climbers. I know there's probably at least one on this call. Make sure you don't put a B in the word climber. So it's climberconsulting.com/AEE. And the other thing is you don't have to use the link right away. So there's no expiration for, once you've made the purchase, I'll send you that link. And, if you want to use it 6 months from now or 10 months from now, totally fine. You can use that whenever you're ready. So if you have maybe a brand new team and you feel like, it's a little early, I don't know, go ahead and purchase it so you get the discount, but then you can, send it to them in 4 months or 6 months or whatever makes sense for you. And if you want to chat about, timing or, if you have questions about that, you can send me an email. So, okay, hopefully, yep, Dan put that link in the chat box. So I'm going to just share a couple other resources for you all before we close. The first is the podcast that I mentioned. 50 episodes. Some of them are just me talking. Some of them are interviews with other people who have expertise in certain areas. Lots of 5-star ratings on iTunes, so go check that out. And then I also send out like a monthly-ish newsletter with articles that I write about creativity, leadership, teams. If you want to sign up, you can go to climberconsulting.com or just shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to just add you if you don't want to go through the little form. And my email address, which I don't have up here, is Amy, AMY, at climberconsulting.com. So I'm going to hang out for a few minutes. If you all want to ask questions, I'm happy to stick around. But feel free to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to stay connected. I'm pretty active on all 3 of those platforms. And I also want to throw this up really quick so you get the reference list in the video or in the recording, but those are some of the references that I used. All right, so I'm going to open it up. What questions do you have about anything that I talked about today? I'll hang out for a few minutes and answer questions. There's a comment from Catherine. Great suggestions. Thanks, Amy. Thank you, Catherine. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Sharon says, thanks so much. Lots to do from here. Yes, there's always a lot of work, but hopefully good in a good way.
Amy, while we're waiting to see if folks have some more questions, I would just like to remind everybody that we will be sending out a follow-up email shortly with links to this PowerPoint presentation, Amy's contact information, information if you're looking to get CEUs for attending this webinar. And also, while you've been talking, I've just been reminded about the last webinar you did for us, which is available free of charge from the AEE website. I'll send a link out to that about the creative problem solving process, which will really help give folks a little bit more insight into that piece of the puzzle, that team process piece. And I think that'll be really helpful information as well. So know that all of that is coming, And like Amy
Cool.
said, we'll stay on the line for a little bit, but for those of you that are taking off, thanks for attending. We hope to see you in Minneapolis next week. I can't believe it's already happening. And Amy, thank you so much for really just, you're on the cutting edge of this stuff, and thanks for bringing us there with you.
Oh, thanks, Dan. This was really fun. Really, yeah, thank you everyone for being here today. And yeah, I'm happy to talk further. I love this stuff. I get so excited about it. So, and maybe I'll see some of you next week at AEE.